You're crouched near a riverbank, sharpening a spear point against a stone. The air smells like rain that hasn't fallen yet, and then you see it. Smoke. Not your smoke. A thin gray line rising from a ridge half a day's walk from your camp. Your stomach drops. You know every fire in your territory. You know every person who tends them. This one belongs to no one you've ever met. Somewhere out there, on the other side of that ridge, there are people, strangers, and you have absolutely no idea if they want to kill you, trade with you, or run from you just as fast as you want to run from them. For most of human history, this moment happened over and over again, in forests, on coastlines, across grasslands, on every continent we ever reached. Two groups of humans, total strangers to each other, coming face to face for the very first time. So what actually happened when that moment arrived? The evidence buried in the ground is about to answer that question in a way you probably won't expect. To understand why this moment was so dangerous, you have to understand how small the human world actually was. For most of our history, people lived in bands of 15 to 50 individuals. That was your entire universe. Everyone you knew, your parents, your children, your rivals, your friends, all of them fit inside that number. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar's research on social group size suggests humans evolved to maintain meaningful relationships with roughly 150 people at most, and in practice, most ancient humans never came close to that ceiling. You knew your people, full stop. Anyone outside that small circle wasn't just unfamiliar, they were, by default, a question mark with teeth. In a world with no writing, no shared language guarantee, and no way to verify intentions from a distance, a question mark was dangerous. Strangers could be carrying disease your body had never encountered. They could be scouting your territory before a raid. They could be starving and desperate enough to take what you had by force. So let's look at what actually happened when two bands collided, starting with the evidence that's hardest to look at. At a site called Nataruk, near Lake Turkana in Kenya, archaeologists uncovered the remains of at least 27 individuals dating back roughly 10,000 years. The skeletons show blunt force trauma to skulls, arrow-like wounds embedded in bone, and bound hand positions suggesting some victims were restrained before they died. This is widely considered one of the oldest known examples of large-scale violence between human groups, predating agriculture and organized states entirely. This wasn't a dispute between two people. This was two groups meeting in a way that ended in mass death. And Nataruk isn't alone. At Jebel Sahaba in Sudan, a cemetery dated to around 13,000 years ago contains dozens of individuals with embedded stone projectile points, some struck multiple times, in patterns consistent with repeated conflict rather than a single event. Layer on top of that the group size math. If your band of 30 ran into a group of 5, you had overwhelming force, and the temptation to simply take their resources by threat or violence was high. Put these pieces together, and the picture seems obvious. First contact meant danger. First contact meant blood. But then you find something that doesn't fit that story at all. Anthropologists studying Aboriginal groups in Australia have documented extensive trade networks moving pituri, a native tobacco, and ochre pigments across thousands of kilometers between groups who had never lived together, exchanged through a careful chain of ritualized contact between neighboring bands. This wasn't accidental, it was systematized. Ethnographic studies of Aboriginal Australian and Amazonian societies describe formalized rules of engagement for meeting strangers, sending a lone, unarmed messenger ahead of the group, using specific calls or songs recognized as non-hostile, exchanging small gifts before anyone got close enough to fight. Anthropologist Marshall Salins described how many small-scale societies used what's called the norm of reciprocity, the immediate exchange of gifts, as a way of converting a stranger into someone owed a debt or owing one, which functionally turned an unknown threat into a known relationship almost instantly. Give someone a gift, and you've created an obligation. That obligation is a kind of leash. It doesn't guarantee peace, but it buys enough time for both sides to see if the other one is dangerous. Even appearance played a role here. Researchers studying contact-era interactions have found that shared gestures, matching styles of tool-making, or recognizable ornamentation, like specific bead patterns, could signal a kind of distant kinship even between groups who had never met, lowering the baseline threat on sight. So now you've got two completely different stories sitting side by side. Mass graves in one direction, trade routes and gift rituals in the other. Both real, both ancient. Which one was actually normal? Here's where it gets stranger than either one. Because the deepest evidence for what happened at first contact isn't sitting in a grave or a trade route. It's sitting inside you, right now, in your own DNA. When modern humans expanded out of Africa somewhere between 50,000 and 70,000 years ago, they didn't walk into empty land. Europe and Western Asia were already occupied by Neanderthals. Further east, by Denisovans. These weren't the same species as us, but they were close enough that first contact between these completely different kinds of humans sometimes led to something that fits neither the war story nor the trade story. It led to children. Genetic studies show that most people with non-African ancestry today carry between 1 and 2% Neanderthal DNA. Some populations in Papua New Guinea and parts of Asia carry up to 4 to 6% Denisovan DNA. This means that at some point, in some specific moment, we will never see a Homo sapiens and a Neanderthal, or a Homo sapiens and a Denisovan, stood across whatever version of that ridge existed for them. And instead of throwing spears, they had offspring, multiple times, in multiple places, over thousands of years. That's not a footnote. That's millions of individual moments of contact that ended in something closer to permanent integration than annihilation. Two entirely different kinds of human beings staring at each other across an ancient version of that exact same fear, and somehow ending up as ancestors to the same family tree, yours. So which was it? Violence or trade or interbreeding? The uncomfortable answer is that it was all three, sometimes within the same region, separated by nothing more than circumstance. Researchers studying modern hunter-gatherer societies, including work compiled by anthropologist Napoleon Chagnon among the Yanomami in the Amazon, have documented that resource pressure and territorial competition are consistently the strongest predictors of intergroup violence, far more than any innate hatred of outsiders. When food and territory were scarce, first contact skewed hostile. Because a stranger near your hunting grounds during a lean season wasn't a curiosity, they were direct competition for the calories keeping your children alive. When resources were abundant, the calculation flipped. A large territory with more food than one group could use made new arrivals less of a threat and more of an opportunity. More hands for a hunt, more genetic diversity for future children. More allies against a third group that might be more dangerous than either of you. Group size mattered too, but not the way you'd expect. Bands roughly matched in size had the strongest incentive to negotiate rather than fight, because a bad outcome for the aggressor was just as possible as a good one. And that rough parity is one of the reasons trade networks and intermarriage were able to develop at all. Put all of it together, and a single picture finally forms. One that's far stranger than either the peaceful, noble savage myth or the constant warfare myth. Both of those stories are wrong, because they're both half right. Ancient humans were capable of genocidal violence against strangers, and the bones at Nataruk and Jebel Sahaba prove it happened. Ancient humans were also capable of deep, generation-spanning integration with total strangers, and the Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA sitting in your own cells right now proves that happened too. Early humans carried both blueprints at once, a threat response system built for defense and a cooperation response system built for expansion. And which one activated during any specific first contact depended on a handful of practical variables. How much food was around, how big each group was, whether either side had a system for managing the encounter, and whether the two groups could find some shared signal, a gesture, a gift, a familiar pattern that said, we're not so different after all. Here's the part that should actually unsettle you. Those same variables are still running the exact same calculation in your brain right now. When you meet someone from a wildly different background, your nervous system is still asking the same ancient questions your ancestors asked on that ridge. Are they like me? Do they have something I need? Is there enough to go around? Do I have a way to signal that I mean no harm? We like to think of modern xenophobia and modern hospitality as cultural phenomena, things we learned from parents or society. But underneath the culture, there's a much older machine running, the same one that decided whether two Ice Age bands ended up trading obsidian or leaving bodies in a lake bed, or becoming each other's ancestors. You didn't inherit tribalism because you're broken. You inherited it because for hundreds of thousands of years, it was the only thing standing between your ancestors and a stranger they couldn't afford to misjudge. And maybe that's the strangest part of all. The instinct that once decided whether two tribes went to war, traded obsidian, or became family through interbreeding is the exact same instinct quietly running every time you meet someone new today. You just don't have a ridge to crouch behind anymore. You have a doorway, a group chat, a new coworker walking into the room. And somewhere underneath all of it, that same old question is still being asked. Friend or threat? We've been asking it since before we had words for either one.